The man had just lit his cigarette when he was splashed by a sports car on the side of the road. Looking at the extinguished cigarette, he flicked it out. The cigarette but immediately flowed into the sewer. Curiosity drove the man to follow. Not long after, the cigarette fell into a manhole cover. The man realized that he was in front of the biggest bank in Argentina. He ponders for 2 seconds and then suddenly runs. He runs with the current. He didn't stop until he was stopped by a bridge. He stuck his head out and looked down. It was the sewer exit he was looking for. He looked back at the bank. A genius and a bold idea came to him. He immediately called his friend. They went to the door of the bank again. When no one was looking, he slipped a tape measure into the sewer. Then they went through the sewer exit they had just discovered. A few moments later, they went underneath the tape measure. The man said excitedly to his friend, "We're only 18 meters away from a millionaire. Because up here is the biggest bank in Argentina." The man's plan was to dig a tunnel right to the bank. The two men agreed. Then they gathered the rest of the gang to discuss the plan. But to dig a tunnel straight to the bank, they had to know the distance from the manhole cover to the bank. But they couldn't just waltz in with a measuring tape. But that didn't stop the man. He had his partner draw a black line on the tire of his bicycle. Then he pushed the bike from the manhole cover. He counted the number of revolutions of the tire as he pushed all the way to the bank. That's how they got the length of the section easily. All that was left to do was a simple maths problem. The distance from the manhole cover to the ground is 18 meters, and the distance from the manhole cover to the bank is 7 meters too. Using trigonometry and the Pythagorean theorem taught by their PE teacher, they could easily work out the hypotenuse, which is the length of the tunnel and the length of the bank. That is the length of the tunnel and the required angle. But that's not enough. To steal the vault, they had to know exactly where it was. So the man went to the bank again. He took out his camera and photographed the layout of the bank's back entrance. Then he went into the lobby and snuck out his camera. He not only captured the location of the surveillance cameras but also the furnishings in the lobby. When no one noticed, he sat down on a chair. Then he took photos without any hesitation. But when he finished taking the photos and got up to leave, the bank's security guard stopped him. The hostage suddenly raised his right hand. He said he wanted to pee. The robber was very kind. He told the man to go to the flower pot. Seeing that the man was a bit nervous, the hostage taker reminded his companions not to stare at him. But 2 minutes later, the man raised his hand again. He told the robber that he still wanted to pee. This time the robbers called the man over. Looking at the gun in the robber's hand, the man shivered in fear. He couldn't imagine what was waiting for him. But the next moment, the robbers opened the door of the bank and let him out. Facing the sheriff's questioning, the man was so nervous that he couldn't say a word. He had already pissed his trousers. And the robber's actions also baffled the sheriff. But this is just the beginning. The sniper reported an even stranger scene in the bank. The robbers took out a small piece of cake and put candles on it. It turns out that they have just learnt that the grandmother among the hostages has a birthday today. So they prepared a cake for her. Under the threat of the robbers, the other hostages also sang a birthday song to the grandmother. Then the robbers gave her the best birthday present of all. He gave her freedom. Watching this scene, the experienced sheriff was puzzled. He always felt that there was something wrong with this robbery, but he couldn't figure it out. And with the robbers stalling, his companions below are frantically opening the blind boxes. But problems soon arose. Because the machine had been running at high intensity, it didn't dissipate heat in time. The machine stopped working. They had no choice but to wait. After a few minutes, the machine seemed to return to normal. But as soon as they unlocked one of the locks, the machine was paralyzed again. To make matters worse, their watches went off. It was time to evacuate. There are still many safes left to be opened. Retreating means giving up their fortune. But the man did not hesitate. He had to follow the plan to the letter. With his announcement, everyone began to retreat in an orderly manner. The robbers above threatened the hostages with toy guns to keep them still. At the same time, they slowly made their way down to the ground, while the men below began to pack. They carried all the sacks to the entrance of the cave. Then 3 of them entered the dungeon first. Then their companions from the outside bring the sacks into the hole. Then the sacks are easily carried down the sloping passage to the sewer. The men below receive the sacks and give them to the men on the boat. Each man is responsible for a key point to maximize efficiency. The men who stayed behind had an important task. They had to clean up the site, to cover up the tunnel and delay the police's pursuit of them as much as possible. But no one would have realized that the police who had been outside for hours had lost their patience. They are now heavily armed and preparing to force their way into the bank. And there's a team standing by at the exit of the sewers. The man in charge hadn't left the bank yet. He took out a red cloth from his bag without any fuss and spread it neatly on the floor. This robber didn't leave the bank in a hurry. He left his gun neatly at the crime scene. What's more, he left a note in an arrogant manner. And he didn't do it to humiliate the police. He wanted to let the police know that they used toy guns during the robbery, so that even if they were caught and convicted, they would get a lighter sentence. After all this, he and his companions cleaned up the floor. Then they went into the tunnel. Then they pulled the rope to move the locker back into the hole. Then they pulled the rope back. And so they disappeared into the bank without a trace. When the police broke into the bank, they found nothing but hostages. But the experienced sheriff noticed the dust on the floor. He asked his men to move the cabinets. He discovered the exit route of the robbers. At this point, he was confident, because he had already sent a team to the sewer exit. But he never thought that the robbers were not going to retreat through the exit. The robbers swam against the current and drove their speedboat deeper into the sewer. Soon they arrived under a manhole cover. A partner had been waiting for them. He got into his modified car and opened the bottom. Then he moved the manhole cover. A hidden escape route was successfully opened. Everyone got into the car one by one. One man was left to transport the sacks. With the help of the lifting equipment, the sacks full of wealth are quickly brought up. When the last person gets into the car, he restores the cover. Everything was done, but then a police car suddenly arrived. But he was in a hurry to get to the bank. He didn't even notice the van full of robbers and loot. At that moment the robbers breathed a sigh of relief. Their genius plan had worked. Inside the bank the police were left staring at 4 toy guns. With their untold riches their lives had changed forever. For the rest of their lives all they had to do was enjoy themselves. Some of them bought cars, some went traveling. All of them were happy. But there was one man who drifted away. He took a lover, but his wife caught him red-handed. In a fit of anger she told the police about his crime. By the time the others saw the news of his partner's arrest it was too late. In less than a month they were arrested one after another. But because of the toy guns left behind and the fact that no one was killed or injured in the case they were all given light sentences in the end. A few years later some have already been released from prison. Their faces don't bear the marks of years behind bars. Instead their faces are filled with heartfelt smiles. It's said that in this real-life genius heist the police recovered just over $1 million in stolen goods. The real amount of money involved is still a mystery. Perhaps even their arrest was part of this genius plan.